Welcome to the Live Love Ministries podcast, a place where we share thoughts, insights, and experiences from the mission field. I'm Eric.
I'm Brittany.
And I'm Julia.
And we're the Live Love Ministries team. Welcome back to part 2 of 5 things missionaries wished you knew. If you missed last week, we encourage you to go back and listen. Last week we covered topics 1 through 3. And they were, number 1 was missionaries are real people, and we spent some time explaining that. We talked about how finances are complicated on the mission field. And then we also talked about that there is a definite difference between short-term and long-term mission. So we were able to cover 1 through 3 last week. This week we're going to talk about numbers 4 and 5. And if you listen to the podcast, you'll figure out what those are pretty quick. But the feedback has been really encouraging. We've received several messages and calls thanking us for addressing these issues. It's been a blessing to share those with others. We've had several missionaries reach out and say how they can relate and how it speaks to them in their world that they live in and the struggles that they have. And so we're thankful to get to share that. And we hope that this week is just as encouraging and speaks to just as broad of an audience, both senders and missionaries and supporters and everybody involved in the missionary call. And so just a reminder, the thoughts and the information from this podcast comes from missionaries themselves, not just from myself, Brittany, and Julia, but it comes from missionaries. Then those missionaries serve in a variety of places all over the world, or have served in places all over the world, some internationally, some domestically, some for journeyman programs that were 2 years, and some that spent decades on the mission field. And so the knowledge and the experience that went into making this podcast is vast. And so it's much larger than just our experience or our thoughts, but this comes from people with over 130 years of experience. And so our prayer today, and it was for last week too, is that this would strengthen the relationship between senders and supporters, that this would open people's eyes to the unique calling that missionaries have and the unique experiences that they face. This will help relationships between missionaries and their home church, help people understand maybe what they're going through, how to better minister to them, and then will ultimately help missionaries stay longer on the field, because that's our heart, is that the longer missionaries are on the field, the longer they're serving, the more opportunity they have to proclaim Jesus, to see people come to Christ, to serve Him. And so that's our heart in making this, is that this would strengthen those relationships. It would make missionaries healthier because they're able to verbalize these things to people who love them and care about them. And then ultimately they would stay longer on the field. So we hope you enjoy the second half of this episode. All right, so we're going on. That was number 3. There's a difference in short-term and long-term missions. And again, I hope you take that as an encouragement. Number 4, we want to talk about the importance of your relationship with missionaries, meaning senders, supporters. Your relationship with your missionaries is so important. Like every single couple or missionary that we interviewed said, our relationship with our senders, with our supporters, is vitally important. Okay? So we don't take that for granted. I don't know if a missionary on earth that takes that for granted. Like, they love their senders and they love their supporters and their home churches, and we long for those relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Missionaries suffer with loneliness. They just do. You think about it, moving to a different culture, different community, even if there are some similarities to your own home culture, it's still not the same. And so they struggle with loneliness, but they don't ever voice that often because they're scared to do that. And so they struggle with being able to communicate those things. We have great supporters and people who reach out to us on a regular basis. We have a great home church. We have great churches who support us, great friends who support us. But your relationship with missionaries is vitally important. And some of the ways that you can communicate that and be there for them are so simple. Mm-hmm. One of those is simply this. Like a couple of missionaries mentioned this. Just answer emails. Like, we make newsletters. Julia makes newsletters. Every missionary makes newsletters. They used to be on paper, but for the most part, if it's gone digital, we still do paper ones sometimes. They're hard. But if somebody sends you an email, like, just shoot back, that's great, I'm praying for you. Or just read your email. Like, we have this thing called MailChimp. Everybody probably knows what that is, but it's like, where you can see how many people open your email. And so, like, we'll work for an entire day, 8 hours on a newsletter. We'll send it out, and we go look at our MailChimp report, like 30% open. Mm-hmm. Oh, man, like you guys are so important to us. Just open it up and read and see what you're investing in, what God is doing with your faithful support. Or sometimes we'll get a notice, unsubscribed. What? They unsubscribed from our, like, we only send one every 2 months, like, it's not like we're sending them 3 times a week, Yeah. And so just a couple of missionaries mentioned this. Just answer emails like, I'm praying for you. I'm here for you. Hey, I noticed in your newsletter that so-and-so came to Christ. How did that happen? Or I noticed that you're struggling with this, or this is a need. Anything I can do? Like legitimately answering emails. Phone calls. Like, just call your missionary for no other reason, just to say hi, how you doing, and have a conversation. Maybe that they don't feel like they have to talk about the mission field with you. Like, hey, what's going on in your family? How you doing? How can I pray for you? What do you guys think about any of those two? I'm gonna mention a few more, but I don't want to move on.
I think especially like phone calls and stuff like that is huge. So me and Brittany have talked about this a lot, but so many people will stress, like, community is so important. Like, you need to live in community. Like, that's how you walk with Christ well, But you have to realize that for missionaries, especially if you're working with, like, unreached people groups, like, there is no community, like, except for, like, the missionaries you're serving with. And so, like, community is just, like, really lacking. And so I think any chance, like, you get the opportunity to just, check in on somebody and, ask how their spiritual walk is going, like, preface it, like, maybe not in, like, a judgmental way, like, going back to what we said before about, like, finances, like, we want to be able to share, openly, but just being, like, a community for people that probably, like, have very, very little community is, like, really huge and important. So
for sure. One of the missionaries mentioned one of the most difficult things for us was going from an active church, because they were going to an unengaged, unreached people group, going from an active church to no church at all.
Yes.
Like, a whole bunch of my identity was tied up in my church, my family, my church family. Like, my teaching came from there. Like, my community came from there. My accountability came from there. And then you move to a place where there is no church. Yeah. And so they struggle with that loneliness.
I think to add to that too, like, it's really helpful if you've been here before or wherever the missionary is serving, because you're able to understand a little bit more than somebody who has never been, or maybe somebody who is a Christian, but like in our case, like, we work on the reservation, and then, like, people in Phoenix have, like, no clue, like, what's going on. And so if you've already been there, you're able to communicate better sometimes.
Yeah. Or just texts, text messages are awesome.
Yeah.
That's the primary form of communication for most people. Just to let people know that they're praying for you, or that you're praying for them, excuse me. I have one friend who doesn't go very many days without sending me a text. And it sometimes just simply says, hey, I just want you to know I prayed for you this morning. Or it might be a question, how can I pray for you today? And he doesn't necessarily mean about the mission field necessarily. How can I pray for you personally? Or I prayed for your family today. Or I know you've got this coming up. I'm praying for that for you and your family. Or, hey, just checking in. Let you know, me and my small group, we prayed for you last night by name. And that's what another missionary mentioned. Like, just knowing that somebody's praying for you by name is huge. And so your relationship with them is important. Care packages, these two ladies mentioned last night. What is your care packages are really cool, really important. Like, just something that says, hey, I was thinking of you. It doesn't have to be anything great, And this is, we're not saying this so you send us care packages, by the way. I'll give you my address after the podcast. But we're talking about missionaries as a whole.
Right.
If you have a missionary in another part of the world and your church has sent them, or you're a supporter of them, just every once in a while, put together a care package for them, or their wife. Missionary wives or church planters' wives. Have a unique role, and so that do things that are, hey, this is just for you. One of the coolest things was, I think for Brittany, was a couple of weeks, a week or so ago, one of our supporters sent their monthly support and then wrote a separate check to Brittany and said, "This is just for you." Like that was in the memo line, just for you. Don't use it anywhere else. And so that was super cool. Like not only was I thinking about your ministry and supported you, but this check is just for you. And that speaks volumes into the life of missionaries. I was thinking about you. Go do something to take care of yourself. Things like that. That's super important. So.
Yeah, I would say definitely that was super special to get that. And it's just like that encouragement to know, like, somebody did think about me. Like, they thought about it. I'm not somebody, like, specifically this person or these people are in Kentucky, where we're from. And so it's like, we've been gone now 10 years. And so sometimes you have that thought, like, do people even remember who I am? If I walked in the door, would they even recognize me now? And so it's like that specific, like, they did remember me. They did think of me. This was an action that required thought. And so that's super special to get. And then to know, like, they realize, going back kind of to the financial thing, we realize that you don't get to do things very much for yourself, and so we want to provide you that opportunity. Awesome. I've had that happen another time before. It's been several years back, probably 5 or 6 years back, but there was a specific group of ladies that were like, "Hey, we want to take you to the mall and we want you to pick out a couple of outfits because we realize that you don't go to the mall, like, at all." And I'm like, "You're right, I don't," and so, like,
that's
they
partly
wanted,
because I don't like the mall.
So they were like, "We want to do that for you, and we want you to go get your hair cut." Like, we realize that this is not something that you do on a regular basis, and probably at that point it had been like literally 2 years since I'd gotten my hair
So
cut.
You were looking sketchy and somebody noticed.
And exactly. So you're right. I don't know if I should be offended or if I should be excited that they realized it. But either way, it was like they noticed. Right. They noticed. And so it was like, thank you for noticing. Another thing that's happened to us before is somebody sent something specifically to our family and said, use this for your family to do something fun together or take them to eat or whatever it is. Yeah. And I can specifically remember almost every time that's happened and almost every thing that we've done with that as our family. So what that tells me is that it was significant to us and it was super special. Yeah. Amen. And so those things are always just that encouragement, to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one time, this local church, Arizona Church, that's a supporter of ours and has been now for the last several years, asked us. We were getting ready for Christmas in the villages, and everybody jumps on board. It's one of the most amazing things we do all year. I love it to see the way people rally together. But they asked for our kids' names and our kids' ages and what they like to do, and then the sizes of their clothes. And they took time to go Christmas shop for every single one of our children. And they didn't just buy them like, here's a Barbie and here's a toy, here's a ball. Like, they thought it through. Yeah, like, one of our kids got a shirt that was a team that they liked, but another kid got something that was like, and so they each got 3 or 4 things, and they just did it to love on our kids. They even brought them and said, "Now, these are for your kids." Had them labeled from, and then had the name of the church. It was actually a Sunday school class in the church. And our kids loved it. I still remember it. I still remember what they got because it was so important. That was super awesome.
That's great.
So, yeah.
I just feel like we're sharing happy things now. Something that I thought was really cool is one of my best friend's moms. She would send me newspaper articles all the time because last year my sister was a senior in high school and she was like killing the basketball game and winning all these crowns and stuff. And so every time she was in the paper, she would like send me a newspaper article, and that was just the sweetest thing because, obviously missionaries miss, a lot of things with their family or whatever it may be. And so it was like, I still get to be a part of this. And I still have almost every single newspaper article on my fridge. And
she does, like, I've seen it.
A year ago, it looks like a shrine to my sister or something. But just super sweet. And I think taking like holidays and stuff like that are like, even if they're like not big holidays, can be like, hey, like, I'm thinking of you. Like, one time, a Sunday school class of girls, they sent me like this huge box of like Valentine's Day stuff, and I was like, this is great. So
that's super cool.
something I did want to say about praying real quick. Like praying for, individual needs and family stuff. But I think it's also huge too when like people like go out of their way, aside from like newsletters, to be like, I'm praying for your ministry, just because sometimes we can feel like missionaries will feel like alone in like the people they're serving. Like, does anybody care? Am I the only people that like care that these people are like dying without the gospel? Which is dramatic, but but it can feel that way sometimes, and so it like shows that you like actually care. And before I left, like I had like a little going away party, and people like signed up. They're like, I'm gonna commit to pray like on the second day of the month, like every month for you. And like people will still like text me like that day and be like, hey, like I'm praying for you. So I just kind of wanted to like reiterate how like something that takes like 10 seconds really does mean a lot. Yeah.
So that was number 4. Do we have any story to go with that, or have I kind of touched on those already?
I think that was most of that one. I can just read through these real fast, but basically kind of this couple listed 5 ways that churches or partners could encourage missionaries, and one was genuine prayer, which we've just talked about, but to know like at certain times or certain services that you're being prayed for by name or by certain people. Number 2 was responding to newsletters. We loved when people responded to monthly newsletters, even if it was a simple I'm praying for you or thank you for sending me this update. It just lets us know that you opened it and read it, and that you're still there for encouragement and support. Number 3 was sending handwritten letters or care packages in the mail. Number 4 was taking the time to call or FaceTime or text. And he said, most of the time people wanted to hear about the ministry, sure, but mostly they just wanted to see how we were. And so those become extremely special when it's like just to check on you personally or your family personally. And then the last one was utilizing us to mobilize missionaries. He said we enjoyed opportunities that we've had to speak at missions conferences, or if it's Lottie Moon Christmas offering or Annie Armstrong or whatever offering time that's going on, even if it's virtual, because it communicates to us that we're appreciated and that we have a role to play in mobilizing others in their missionary task. So just having those opportunities to be able to share. And I think especially now with it being coronavirus, if your church is still not meeting in person, still having that opportunity to share virtually, even with a small group or Sunday school class, or even if it's your church, making a video and sharing it for 2 minutes before service or whatever, to know like mission still is happening even in coronavirus. So those are basically those main things. I think we touched on most of them.
So let's reiterate how important the relationship is between senders and the ones they've sent, supporters and missionaries. Like we really love those relationships and long for them, and are thankful for them. My friend that prays for me often, it means a lot to me. And so I think most missionaries would echo that same thing. Okay, number 5. And this one is one that we're going to touch on that might be a little bit different than what people thought we were going to say, or it might go a little bit deeper than what people were expecting. But number 5 is missionaries need a safe place. Missionaries need a safe place. And what we're talking about here is like, for a missionary, if you're having a hard time, you need to be able to have a safe place that you can communicate with others without fear of losing support, or without fear of being judged, or things like that. Because sometimes you're going through a hard time, and you need to be able to communicate that with somebody else and have a safe place to do it without fear of retaliation. We talk about that all the time. Man, I wish I could just tell somebody this that's going on, but I'm afraid if I do, then they'll think I'm weak in this area, or if I do, they'll think I'm not serious about this or whatever. And that's not just us. This is missionaries across the board, that they internalize so many things. The fact that this one person we've been talking about throughout the podcast is a counselor to missionaries shows you that they are longing for a safe place to be able to vent, to be able to verbalize things, to be able to deal with mental stress issues that they have, emotional stress issues that they have. and things like that. So missionaries need a safe place. You guys want to jump in? I'm going to come back in with a couple of other things in a minute, but do you guys want to jump in on that one?
Sure. Just echo all that you said, but I'll give like a personal experience. I know like last year, about a year ago, like I was like really struggling, like almost burnt out, like, do I need to stay in Arizona? Like throwing around that question, and like I started going to counseling and it was awesome. But like for the longest time I was like, I don't want people to know that I'm going to counseling. Like I'm supposed to, like I'm a missionary, I'm supposed to have it together, like I'm supposed to be doing well in my walk with Jesus. And so it was a time that I like really needed people to pray for me and to know that I was struggling, and be able to encourage me. But I think like out of fear I like kept that from a lot of people, because I don't know, sometimes even like in our culture, like counseling still gets like a bad rap sometimes, like, oh, you're going to counseling, like what's going on, you know? So yeah, I think just having that safe place, like to be able to communicate without fear that somebody's going to like take away your support, or like even if you're at the point with like, you know, considering like leaving, you know, obviously you don't want everybody to know that, but like people should be able to know that, because that's like a huge spiritual attack. Like if God has like called you to a place, like the devil obviously doesn't want you to be there, and so you're going to be under attack. And I feel like it's completely normal for people to be like, oh, am I really supposed to be here? Like, can I really do this long term? So yeah, I think just letting people share how they're really doing without like judging or, oh, should I be supporting this person is really huge.
Yeah. And then when Julia talked about going to counseling, I mean, for me, that, you know, like as she shares that with us, you know, like to me, I'm encouraged by that, because she cares. She's not willing to just let herself burn out and leave. She wants to take care of herself so that she can better serve here and be healthier spiritually. Because if she's completely dry, or we're completely dry, or missionaries completely dry, and they're done, they're no good to the mission field. You can't pour something out of you that you don't have. You can't bring living water to something when you're completely dry, right? And so I think that's awesome, and that's encouraging that she is able to go do that and now be able to share that with others. And so if you didn't know that, surprise, but it is. I mean, missionaries do struggle. And so
I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh man, I didn't know that was such a huge struggle, or, you know, I thought maybe I knew what was going on, but I don't, like, feel free to, even after this podcast, text or call or email or whatever and say, hey, I can be that safe space for you. Because a lot of times we still even wonder, like, that, you know, when somebody asks the question, hey, how are things going? Well, that's a really open-ended question. And so I try to feel it out before I even answer it. You know, like, do you really want to know, or do you want me to tell you the good things?
Yeah. And that was one of my notes.
Yeah.
Need a safe place. And then 2 was be able to, what we just talked about, communicate when we're having a hard time. And one of those was have a place to share negatives/struggles, because things aren't always positive. Right. Have a safe place to do those.
Right. And realize that when we're even sharing the struggles, it's not like we're complaining or like we're saying like this is the worst thing ever. We're just saying like we have nobody else to share this with. You know, our families aren't here. Sure, we can call them and talk to them on the phone, but it's just not the same, you know, to be able to do that. And so, and sometimes it's like, I'm sure my parents don't want to know everything that is wrong, because then they might, you know, start worrying or whatever that is. And so
for sure.
So it's just nice to be able to actually be honest, and to be able to actually open up and share what's going on, you know. And that doesn't happen often, and when it doesn't happen, what that means is that you're keeping that inside of you. And so it's bottling up. And I can say this from like experience, like sometimes for me, it's years of bottled up, of I'm not sharing this with anybody other than Eric. I mean, obviously he's knowing. And then it's like all of a sudden it just comes out. It's like, what in the world? I'm so emotional, or I'm angry, or whatever. And it's because I haven't been able to share it. And it's like, it's just not healthy, and it needs to take place, you know. And so being able to do that with people that, like Julia said earlier, that you can really count on, that you don't have to worry about them judging you, like, oh, you're a missionary and you think this, or you've had this thought or whatever. Like, that goes back to point one of being real people. And then also going back to point two of, like, well, if I share this, are they going to be like, well, I can't support you anymore because of this specific thing? Because
support is we need support, yes, financially. Obviously, we've made that very clear. Every missionary makes that clear. We need support other ways, too. Right. Like, support isn't just financial, right? That's good. And so, missionaries need a safe place, too. One of those is to be able to be a good brother or sister in Christ, meaning, like, the freedom to hold other brothers and sisters accountable and be able to speak truth into others' lives without fear of losing support, or maybe to be able to take a stance on what they believe is true and right without fear of retaliation. Obviously, we live in a world where we are divided on many, many, many things. And we, all three sitting around this table, have really passionate thoughts about some of the division, but oftentimes we can't share those. And we feel like ours are rooted in Scripture and rooted in the things of God and truth. But sometimes we feel like, man, if I call out my friend, are they going to stop supporting me? Is their church going to stop supporting me? Because maybe they write the check, or maybe they, are in the Sunday school class, or maybe they are. But like, we feel like maybe our experience, just speaking for example, like, if it's something about immigration, we live in a border state. Maybe our view on immigration might be different than somebody who doesn't live in a border state or has no experience with that. And so maybe we could, in love, speak truth into a situation, but we will withhold that because we're scared. I mean, honestly, and that could be a fault on our part. Not, you could say, well, you're not trusting God or whatever. That may be true. But at the same time, we fear, like, if we were able to speak to that, for example, especially a hot button topic like that, is like, I don't post stuff on social media. I don't know if anybody follows me, but people do. But I don't post a lot of things because the one or two times I have in my entire life, and like, I just get blasted. Like, all right, I'm done. I have viewpoints, and I have a heart to see things like reconciliation take place. But oftentimes we're scared to share those. And I don't know if you guys want to speak into that. I just had that in my notes. So.
Yeah, I think even like for me too, like with everything going on with like racial reconciliation, like I have an interesting perspective being half black and half white. And so I hate sometimes that I can't share more, and not in like a way that's like bashing people. Like, I don't think that would ever be any of our intentions, but just like, I want to share my experience.
Right.
But even sharing my experience could like cost me big time, you know, so.
And so those are just personal thoughts. Like, missionaries need to be able to do that, a safe place to do that. And maybe that's something that won't ever fully go away. We have thoughts because we have children who are from other countries. But sometimes we just withhold those. And I don't know if that's for the best or not or whatever, but we just are being honest. Like, sometimes we want to be able to share these things, and we just don't. And so those are kind of some of the things missionaries need a safe place to talk about. And so I hope that, if you're a supporter or a sender or a friend, that you are that safe place for your missionaries, for your church planters, for your cross-cultural workers that you support, that you love. And maybe you aren't in the position where you can financially support your missionary, but you can pick up the phone and call them, and be a part of that safe place and say, hey, what do you think? Maybe ask them about those issues that you have a unique perspective, and so tell me your thoughts. I'm safe, whatever, and you can talk to me. So I hope that this podcast has been helpful. I've loved being able to talk about some of the things, but I do want to mention a couple of other things. Those are kind of our 5, but we just put some things that kind of made the, like when you're in a competition and you get honorable mention, like you didn't place, but you got a participation award because you kind of did all right. Maybe you weren't last, but you definitely weren't first. We have 3 or 4 things that kind of are like honorable mention things. Like, we want to throw these out there that are super important for people to know, but maybe not everybody said them, and so they didn't get kind of their own category. One of those things is this. One of the missionaries said, I think it's important for people to not judge us not judge our work on the faithfulness of others. Like, sometimes the places that you minister to are very, very difficult. And so sometimes, you may lead somebody to Jesus, and you've talked about that, and you've shared that in your slideshow presentations, and you've used that as a way to say, look at what God's doing. And then a year later, that person abandons the faith, and they are, not following Jesus, and they never really were, and they're out living the life they lived before. And then when somebody asks about it, you're like, oh yeah, so and so, and you feel like, I don't know that I can tell you that because. And so this missionary said, I just wish people would understand it's God that changes people. It's God that saves people, not us. So sometimes let missionaries share even the stories of the people that they've loved on and poured into for years. Because listen, there are people we've loved on and poured into for years who are still struggling to this day, And sometimes we don't share their struggles. Number one, it's their story. Number two, sometimes it's hard to share because, our success, and that's in quotes, oftentimes is looked at on, the faithful, like how faithful are other people or whatever. So right. You guys agree with that?
Absolutely. Like, even if people are not surrendering their life to Christ, doesn't mean that we're not still telling them or that we're not still doing our job and being obedient to what the Lord has called us to. And so our success is our obedience, not what other people do. And you just cannot gauge a missionary's worth based on the results. Yeah. I mean, if that's what you're doing, then it's wrong.
Yeah, and there's stories to go along with that where missionaries have come, 300 people came to Jesus or 1,000 people come to Jesus, and they feel like they have to share that with their supporters. And then maybe a year passes and 2 of those people are walking with Jesus, or whatever. But they shared that, you know what I mean? And so we have made a commitment. We're not going to share false things ever. You shouldn't. But some missionaries are tempted to because they feel like their success, again, is whether or not people come to Jesus and are growing in their faith. And I love what you said. Our success is in our obedience.
I think going along with that, also recognizing, well, yes, we were super excited to share with you what God was doing and how he was saving people. We were fully convinced of that. And so we were, excited. We were hyped. We were spending so much time with these people. And then, when we do see them fall off, it's really hard. Yeah. We've spent several nights lamenting with quotes, I'm just man, we thought God was doing A, B, C, and D, and now we look back and what happened, and so. And
then we start sometimes judging ourselves. Did I not disciple them well? Did I not?
Yeah, exactly. So as excited as we are just as much heartbroken when it doesn't work out.
And grief sets in, and you struggle with grief. And I heard a missionary say one time, being on the mission field is a continual cycle of grief because you're grieving over what you've left and the people that you miss, and then you're grieving for the people that you are ministering to and their lostness, and then you reach people, and then you move on to a new place because that's what missionaries do. They reach people, then they move on, and so then you're grieving the people that you've left there, and so it's a continual cycle of that, and so that kind of sets in, and so. We don't say that in a negative way. That's just the reality of it. So that one was an honorable mention, not judging work of missionaries on the faithfulness of others. It's God who saves and God who changes people, not us. Okay? And then the mission field changes people. That was a kind of a theme that we saw in a few answers and from a few people, that the longer you're on the mission field, the more you change, and not in a negative way at all. I don't mean that it's a negative way, but you're just not the same person you were when you left your home culture. Now you've spent a decade or 2 decades, or for some people that we interviewed, 4 decades in a different culture. And so when they come back on furlough, or when they come back to raise support, or when they come back to hang out with you, there's a chance they're going to be entirely different than they were when they left. And so the mission field changes people, right? Their desires change, or maybe the things that are important to them change. And maybe as a sender or a friend, you're talking about something, they're not engaged because that's just not their heart anymore. And so you may have to be a student of them, to figure out what things that are different about them. You guys agree, disagree with that?
I think also if it's a friendship thing, like just going back to being open and listening to what needs to be shared. I remember a specific incident when we were when we went back to Kentucky, and we were with some friends, and we were sharing something that had happened like in our life. And of course at first it was just like the normal, like, you're hanging out, small talk, whatever. But then as the night progressed, it got into more serious conversation. And I remember we shared something that had happened that was, pretty serious or whatever since we'd been here. And it was like crickets, because it was like they didn't know what to say or how to respond. And it like left us feeling like, okay, maybe we shouldn't have said that, or, whatever. And so just continue to be the friend. Like if you were the friend, just continue to be that friend.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to respond, just say, man, that's really difficult. I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
But it shows that you still care, even if there's that difference of like, well, we've never had a conversation like this before, and now we are, kind of thing. Yeah. Like, it just, things may be different, but it's okay. Like, you can still, like, communicate and talk and be friends without, like, that awkwardness, you know?
For sure. You have anything on that one? No. Okay. Another one. Struggles on the mission field are different than they are maybe for a majority of people who aren't on the mission field. And what I mean by that is if comes from some missionaries, their thoughts. And so if they're sharing, a struggle, if they do get to a point where they feel comfortable sharing a struggle with a friend or a sender or a church, they've talked about how difficult it is for that person to say, oh yeah, I understand, and then say, I went through this too, but they don't relate to each other. Like, so for example, missionary is saying, you know what, this person that I've ministered to, this is a true story, this person that I have ministered to just committed suicide. And then they shared that story with somebody else, and that person said, yeah, I know, my friend betrayed me. Like, those are two different things. Like, I know what you're going through because my friend doesn't like me anymore, or my friend is not long. Like, I'm telling you about somebody who I poured into and took their own life. You're telling me about somebody who you might make up over with coffee next week. You know what I'm saying? And so those are different. And so just understanding that the struggles on the mission field are different. And not better or worse. It's not saying that people that aren't on the mission field don't struggle, just realizing they are different, because you wrestle with a whole new, different thing. Like, the reason you're going to the mission field is because the place that you're going to needs Jesus. And so that comes with its whole gamut of struggles. And so, I don't know, any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I think too, going along with that, like, yes, realize the struggles are different, but I think something I've had to communicate with my friends a lot has been like, oh, like, I just know you're like going through so much. Like, it's okay to like acknowledge like your struggles too. Like, just because the missionary you might have a friendship with is dealing with a whole lot of stuff, like, doesn't mean that they don't want to hear like what you're going through and what you're struggling with. So
that's a really good thought. Yeah. We want to be a good friend too, to other people.
Sure.
So, all right. So that's kind of our thoughts for today. We hope it was encouraging to you. We hope that it maybe helped enlighten you to some of the struggles of missionaries, ways that you can be a more encouraging sender or supporter. But ultimately, I think we want to end with like how thankful we are to our senders and our supporters and our friends. Now, listen, we're not saying all of these because they're all what we said. Again, this is coming from missionaries with over 130 years of combined experience, and so this is across the board. And so we have great stories of faithful supporters and friends. But there is another side to it, and we hope that this spoke into that. We hope that this sharpened you, this opened maybe your eyes, challenged you a little bit to love on your missionaries, cross-cultural workers, church planters, whatever they are, in a new way, and to be intentional about that. And so, you guys have any closing thoughts?
I mean, just to reiterate, we just thank you. Like, more than likely, if you're listening to this podcast, it means that you care for missionaries. And so we just want to reiterate our thanks to you for your prayer, for your financial support, for your encouragement, for your partnership, just all of it, because it's desperately needed for us. And basically, like, we're telling you how important it is, and like in our life in this podcast, we've been able to relay that. And so if you're one of those people, we just want to express our thanks and our appreciation for your love and sacrifice for missionaries.
Yeah. We love you a whole lot, and we couldn't do what we do without you.
We always sign our thank you notes or our newsletters with your missionaries, and then put our names in. That's what we feel like we are, because, again, we couldn't do what we do without our supporters. So we just hope that was encouragement to you. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Love Ministries podcast.
We hope it was encouraging, made you think, and broadened your understanding of our mission and the mission of making disciples of all nations. You can find out more information about our ministry at www.liveloveministries.org.
If God leads you to partner with us financially through prayer, or if you're interested in bringing a mission team to Arizona or one of our other locations, you can find that information on our website as well. Until next time, keep loving people and keep pointing people to Jesus, and we'll see you then.